Since there's not a lot going on in my garden at the moment, I figured I'd post a video or two on some of the meals we make from the produce we grow. So today, I'm going to show you how I make a baked stuffed winter squash dish that my family looks forward to every fall. The squash I'm using this time around is from a hybrid plant that volunteered last year, the seeds of which I saved. I'm pretty sure it's a Maxima cross between a sweet meat and a golden nugget. Any squash that has a decent sized cavity on the inside will work well for this, and the recipe can be scaled up or down to accommodate different sized squashes. This one here is about 3 pounds, and it was about enough to feed my family for 2 nights. Alright, the first thing I'm going to do is break off as much of the stem as possible, and then cut the top inch or so off of the squash. As you can see, this one turned out to be a little bit on the tough side to cut through. I probably could have used a sharper knife had I had one, but with a little bit of elbow grease, I made it work. Alright, next I'm going to remove the seeds and hollow out the inner cavity. You could set aside the seeds to roast and eat, but I've never personally been a fan of roasted pumpkin or squash seeds, so these are just going in the compost. Alright, while I'm doing this, a few quick notes. First, I'm an okay home cook, but certainly nothing even vaguely resembling a trained chef. I have a sort of informal, haphazard approach to cooking, so you're not going to hear a lot of precise amounts and times here. I'm assuming everyone else trying something like this will just want to modify the recipe to suit their own tastes anyway, so I'm not going to go too far into the weeds trying to determine, everything down to the last milligram. Still, I will list the general ingredients in the description. Second, while this dish is pretty simple, it is time and labor intensive. You're probably looking at a good 2 hours total prep and cooking time. So it's a good dish to start on a chilly weekend afternoon, but probably not a good 6 p.m. after a hellish workday dinner. Finally, this is comfort food and probably contains more calories than a person should eat in a week, let alone a sitting. If you've ever wondered how a guy who grows hundreds of pounds of veggies each year is so damn fat, well, keep watching. With the squash hollowed out, I'm going to rub everything down with a blend of various seasonings. A little bit of salt, sugar, brown sugar, garlic and onion powder, and a dash of nutmeg, cinnamon, and fennel seed. Again, the seasoning should be modified to personal taste. Next, I'm going to pre-roast the squash. This keeps the stuffing from turning soupy and concentrates the natural sugars. Cooking time for this phase will vary depending on the squash size and thickness. This one took about an hour at 350 degrees Fahrenheit to reach the desired softness. Next, I'm going to scrape the cooked squash from the top and set it aside to blend into the stuffing later. I'm also going to very carefully enlarge the cavity by scooping out a bit more squash. With all that out of the way, it's time to get the stuffing going. I'm going to start by sauteing some chopped onions, roughly 1.5 cups, in a little bit of butter and olive oil. I'm going to toss in a little bit of the seasoning mix that I used to rub on the squash halves. And I'm going to start browning everything down. Once the onions have a nice golden hue to them, I'm going to add some chopped mushrooms. Again, this is, roughly 1 cup or so. And I'm going to cook those down together for a bit. And once everything looks about like this, I'm going to cut the heat and transfer the mushrooms and onions into a bowl for use later. Next, I'm going to brown down about 1 pound of Italian sausage. I prefer mild for something like this, but if your tastes run that way, you can certainly use hot Italian sausage. Alright, now that the sausage is cooked thoroughly, I'm going to add the mushrooms and onions back in. I'm keeping everything at a low heat right now. Stir that in a bit. From this point on, I'm going to add the occasional splash of white wine here to everything, and then just keep reducing that liquid back off. At this point, I'm also going to add about half a tablespoon of chopped sage from the garden, and this bundle of fresh thyme from the garden as well. And I'm just going to stir and let all the flavors blend together here for a little bit, adding a splash or two of wine if things start to dry out a bit too much. And sprinkle in a little bit more seasoning just because, and let it continue to cook down. Once everything looks about like this, I'm going to pull that bundle of thyme out of the way, just because the texture wouldn't be so great. And with the burner on a low heat, I'm going to start to add the rest of my stuffing ingredients. That pureed squash that I salvaged from the top earlier, and the trimmings from the inside of it. And I'm going to do my best to blend it well in with the sausage. Up next, I'm going to add, maybe half a cup of Parmesan cheese. And again, I'm going to want to try to blend that in as best I can. I'm also going to stir in maybe half a cup of panko breadcrumbs, just to bind everything together. And I'm going to continue to stir and blend until everything seems pretty evenly mixed. All right, that looks pretty good, so I think it's time to actually stuff it inside the squash. The tricky part here is to stuff everything inside of the squash without splitting the skin, which you can see just from handling. There's a bit of a tear on the left-hand side of it there. This turned out actually not to be that big of a deal. It wasn't really a hindrance to getting everything inside. I just had to be a bit careful. All right, and the last thing I'm going to do before popping this back in the oven is garnish on top with a little extra Parmesan cheese. The idea is that the cheese should crisp up and give it a really nice golden brown look on the top. Now it's going to go back in the oven at 350 degrees for 30 to 45 minutes to heat through and so that cheese crisps up on the top. And here it is, piping hot right out of the oven. Looking real good, and honestly, it tasted amazing as well. I recommend serving this with a little bit of homemade bread. You can scoop the filling out and sort of spread that on top of a slice of nice warm home-baked bread, and it is beyond perfect. All right, so that is all I really have for today. If you like the occasional cooking video like this, just let me know in the comments. If you hate them, let me know, and I'll axe them from the rotation. But until next time, of course, let's hope it all doesn't die.